Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to take a look at the Holocaust and the rise of the Third Reich. We've been taking a look, just to give you kind of an overview of this semester, kind of a bird's eye view of it. We've been taking a look at the rise of nationalism and how that creates a national identity and a common culture, common heritage. And then we've been taking a look at the common man and how the individual fits in within the larger context of nationalism. We examined a couple examples within Russia and also the United States during the Great Depression. Then we've been transitioning a little bit to take a look at race and how race becomes this this component within nationalism. Today we're going to continue that and take a look at that race issues and how it pertains to the nation. And how it relates to nationalism. I wanted to just kind of go over a couple of questions as you read Wiesel's The Perils of Indifference for you to think about. And you're going to see a couple of these questions again in the discussion board for the week, and we might talk a little bit about them in our Zoom meeting. But the first question that I want you to think about as you read through it is that Wiesel asserts that indifference is not neutral. It is evil, right? So as we think about that, it's kind of an interesting way of thinking about indifference. Normally we think about indifference as kind of neutral. Someone's just kind of apathetic. I don't really care. But he says that that is actually an act of being evil, right? And he blames the United States for ignoring the horrors in Germany, right? Knowing about the Holocaust, many of the U.S. government officials knew what was happening in Germany, and we didn't intervene. We didn't stop what was happening. And we didn't get involved sooner, and he suggests that we became indifferent to that suffering. And I want you to discuss whether or not that is a fair criticism, right, as he blames the United States for ignoring them. And one particular example that he cites is that there was a boat of refugees that came to the U.S. That was filled with survivors from the Holocaust. And what the United States decided to do, right, rather than welcoming them in and saying, you know what, you will find a place for you out in Idaho or Wyoming or wherever we have a lot of land, they sent them back to Germany, sent them back to the concentration camps. And so as you guys think about, as we go through and talk about these ideas, I want you to think about, whether the United States should have taken them in. And I guess the argument that the U.S. officials probably had at the time was, well, we're not involved in a war with Germany. We don't really want anything to do with them. We don't want to anger them. And we're in the midst of a Great Depression, right? So how can we have any more people that's going to tax the system, right? So I think that may be what people in the government like FDR and his officials were perhaps thought at the time. But then, as we kind of take a look back at that, is that enough? Did we do enough for them? Should we have done more? Should we have stood up to Germany? Should we stand up to evil? Right? And so, he's suggesting that allowing evil to happen when you know that it's happening is allowing the horrors and atrocities that evil creates to happen. So you become in somewhat of a participant. You're not an active participant, but you're an inactive participant in allowing evil to continue. And so it's kind of an interesting charge that he lays. So something that I want you to think about, whether that's a fair criticism. And then another question to think about as you're going through this, as we apply it to our day. Some may argue that our society struggles with apathy and caring about anything beyond ourselves and our own personal interests. We live in the kind of me era, the era of the iPads and the iPhones and the selfies. And I want you to consider whether this means that our indifference today fits Wiesel's definition of evil, right? So are we evil as we focus only on ourselves and as we have greater apathy for the larger world around us and not caring enough about others and the suffering that's out there? Another question to think about is our ancestors did not have the internet and were not aware of all the pain and suffering in the world the way and to the same extent that we are today. Is it unreasonable to expect people today to care about all the suffering in the world? And so just stopping there for a second, right? This one, the second question really puts us on the hot seat, right? We need to not be apathetic. The third question kind of takes us a little bit off the hot seat and gets us to think about it from another angle. Can we care about everything, right? That we're constantly inundated on the internet and on the news about all of the suffering in the world. Can we, be involved in everything? Can we save everything? Could indifference be a way of self-protection or the realistic recognition that we cannot change everything? And then, so maybe our indifference that we have today, or the level of apathy that we experience, maybe that's just us shutting down, realizing that we're not all powerful and we really can't make a big difference. And then thinking about that, how do you think that Wiesel would respond to this kind of criticism? Do you think he would say, "Yeah, okay, that's fine," or would he say, "You know what? We still need to do more, right? We still need to be more aware. We still need to be more involved. We can't just sit there and say we can't do anything and be powerless. We need to be empowered," right? Something to think about, right? And I wanted to, within that question, I wanted to think about this particular quote because this captures the essence of our day in a way that few quotes do. It says, "Our children have picked up on this consumer attitude." And so the quote's dealing with this idea of consumerism. When reminded by his father due to his chores of mowing the lawn, the 15-year-old boy replied, "It's not my lawn," right? So this idea of indifference and, focusing on own selfish cares. When an 11-year-old boy failed to thank his father for a Hanukkah gift, his mother admonished him for not saying thank you. The boy's response, "Why should I? I didn't like it." A 16-year-old girl was incredulous that anyone would expect to have a common family dinner on a regular basis. With complete innocence, she asked a national public radio reporter, "How can we expect to eat together if we're not all hungry at the same time?" Children have come to see themselves under our tutelage and that of the marketplace only as consumers of parental and community services, not as citizens with responsibilities to families and communities. And so in some ways, our society pushes this consumer mindset of, just kind of go out and fill your own whims and your own needs and kind of only serve yourself rather than focusing on community, what's good for humanity, and teaching people to be responsible citizens. And as we become more aware, hopefully we'll think more about how can we be more involved within our community and more responsible citizens and not, fall back on the default of just being completely apathetic or self-concerned. Number 4, and you'll probably see this one on the discussion board. What is our responsibility to the suffering of others? How do we balance between awareness and action versus indifference and apathy, right? So as we think about the questions 2 and 3, right, as we think about not being indifferent, but also, we can be overwhelmed. How do we balance that? How do we find common ground? So something to think about as we apply Wiesel's ideas to today. And then the last question to think about as you read through the Perils of Indifference. Wiesel states, he says that indifference is not only a sin but a punishment. Determine in what ways the internet age of indifference may be its own punishment. So how can indifference be punishment? So look for that. What is he arguing with that in this article? And then in what ways could we be kind of living in our own self-inflicted punishment within that? All right, let's take a look at the end of World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. What I'm going to argue to you today as we take a look at the rise of the Third Reich is that the Third Reich was actually in some ways directly as a response to the end of World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. And what I mean by that is that the events that led to the end of World War I and its surrender and the nations deciding not to fight is actually going to lead to very harsh economic conditions in Germany. That's going to lead to extremism within Germany, and so that's going to bring about Nazism. And so what I want you to think about as we go through is that we're going to take a look at that the Third Reich and the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany isn't necessarily something that just is this weird kind of microcosm that was just kind of, can never happen again. We need to think about what lessons we can learn from it and what conditions brought them to this particular point, right? So as we take a look at this, mainly with the Treaty of Versailles, that the leaders of France, England, and the United States came together to consider what to do about the problem with Germany, because they seen Germany as powerful and a threat to them. So they were focusing on what to do. And so France wanted to punish Germany because of the beating that they took on the battlefield and to ensure that Germany would never be able to threaten them again. And so as we look at this map real quickly here, we see Germany and we see France. And so this was a big part of the front lines, and you can see that Germany was, in close proximity, and France was taking a lot of losses as a result of Germany. So they wanted to make sure that they would never have to fight them in a war again. And so they wanted more extreme measures than that. The United States took a much softer approach to that, and then England was somewhere in the middle. And they said, let's kind of find a balance. And so what we see with the Treaty of Versailles is the balance between, going too extreme and going too soft on Germany. So we see that it's kind of an interesting compromise here. But the compromise that they found was still quite extreme for Germany, because as we talked about with World War World War I just mainly ended with everyone deciding that they were tired of fighting on the battlefield. It wasn't necessarily any major victory on either side. And as we also taken a look at the beginning of World War I, it wasn't really due to any one particular nation. It was all nations, as Thomas Hardy suggests, striving to make the Red War yet redder. And so there was no one person to blame or nation to blame. There was enough blame to go around. But what happened in the end of World War I is everyone wanted to blame Germany, right? And so Germany wasn't to blame for the war. But the reason why they wanted to blame Germany was because they seen Germany as the greatest threat to future peace. And so number one, the thing that the Treaty of Versailles wanted to do is they wanted to blame Germany for the war, and so they call that the war guilt, right? So Germany is to blame for the war, therefore, you have to do all of these other, kind of war reparations in order to make up for your crimes against humanity for starting the war. And then Germany is like, hey, we didn't do it, right? The number two thing that the Treaty of Versailles pushed for was the loss of land within Germany. And so here on this map here, you can see the dark tan areas here are the lands that Germany lost as a result of the Treaty of Versailles. And this is going to be really important as we get into World War II, because Germany is going to want to come back and capture this land in Poland, which is going to bring about World War II. And so they lose this land, which is 25,000 square miles, and within this, you have a loss of people, you have a loss of resources, you have a loss of tax dollars, and so it's quite substantial. Germany is about 7%. Look at this, they lost about the size of West Virginia, which was about 7% of the size of Germany at the time, which is about equal to, if we can factor this into the United States, 7% of Germany is equal to the size of Texas. And so this would be like the United States losing Texas, right? Or West Virginia, as we think about that. So so maybe some people out there probably wouldn't mind losing West Virginia, and maybe some wouldn't mind losing Texas, but it's part of their heritage, right? It's part of their identity. And so they saw this as a tremendous loss. And so they didn't want to lose anything. They didn't want to lose those rich resources. And this area in here was particularly rich with coal. And so it was quite substantial. They lost 7 million people, and then they also lost the land in Africa. And so all of these, the dark green here, are lands that Germany once owned as part of their colonies, and they had to give these up to France and England. And so now they're losing these resources as well. And then they also had to demilitarize, right? So they couldn't have any more than 100,000 soldiers, and they couldn't have any more than 1,500 officers. And so the idea for this was to keep Germany relatively small, at least the military, so they can't be aggressive, right? And so that was a way for France and England and the rest of Europe to protect itself. They lose 8 battleships and 42 destroyers. and they can have no air force. And so, again, the military restrictions is to make sure they can't be aggressive. But the problem with this, right, they're losing land, they're losing resources. Is this going to be something that's going to play into the mindset of the Germans, and that's what Hitler is going to exploit. But also this idea of not being able to protect themselves against aggression. And so they're Germans, right? As we think about France seeing Germany as aggressive, Germans see France and England as just as aggressive, and so now they feel vulnerable that they can't protect themselves, and so that's going to be something else. And then, in addition, kind of the nail in the coffin for them was they gave them $132 billion war debt, or it's about $442 billion today, meaning that any type of buildings or any type of destruction that was incurred during the war, Germany had to pay for, right? And so, just to give you a sense of what that would be, right? So this stack here is $1 million, right? So you can kind of fit that in your backpack, right? $100, then a kind of a stack of hundreds is 10,000. A little stack here for a backpack, you can fit that $1 million there. A pallet would be 100 million. And then what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 pallets. Yeah, that makes sense. 10 pallets would be 1 billion. And then if you take a look at, a trillion here, right? So here's the same with all of the pallets that are being stacked. Germany would have to pay for half of this. And so it's a lot. And this is going to economically cripple Germany. And so what happened as a result of this? The German officials, when they saw all of these restrictions on them, they took a look at this list and said, "Yeah, we're not going to agree to that. There's no way I'm going to put my name on that document." And France and England said, "Well, you can, or we're going to go back to war." And Germany said, "That's fine." And then, like right at the last minute, it was before the deadline was coming due, and it was like midnight. Right before that, someone did sign the document just to stop from going back to war. And what happens when Germany hears about this? This is the Reichstag in Germany. There's a mass revolt, as you can imagine, that people have said, "Hey, this is not right. Why are we being punished so severely for this when everyone else is equally to blame?" Right? So as we've talked about the economy tanking in the late 1920s and early 1930s with the Great Depression, we see that the effects not just happening in the United States, but they're happening throughout the world. And I can't remember who said it. Maybe it was Henry Ford or something that says when the United States catches the sniffles, the entire world catches a cold or pneumonia or something along those lines, right? And so, similar ideas. So, whenever the United States is as a predominant economic force within the world is starting to suffer economically, the rest of the world starts to suffer as well. And so, whatever we experience in the U.S., Germany felt many times, maybe 10, 20, maybe 100 times more than what we felt in the U.S. because they also had to pay back the war reparations. And so here you see a couple, just the homeless that's happening in Germany during the Great Depression. And then here you see a cartoon that's depicting the problems of this debt that's on Germany, weighing them down to make it difficult for them to rebuild. And here's a couple other images for you to consider. Here we see a barrel of Deutschmarks, of their currency, and it's being weighed, right? Not counted, but weighed on a scale to buy a loaf of bread. And a similar kind of idea here, we see them weighing the cash in order to buy goods and services. There's an infamous story. I don't know how true this is. It might be apocryphal. I don't know, but. Anyway, the story goes something like there's a person that would be carrying a wheelbarrow in Germany to the local baker in order to buy a loaf of bread, and they had to have barrel full of Deutschmarks of their bills in order to buy the bread because of massive inflation that was happening. And the reason why there was massive inflation, just kind of back up a little bit, is what Germany started to do in order to pay back the war reparations is they decided to print money. And what happens when you start printing money, then you're going to have a lot more money in circulation, and when you have a lot more of anything, then the value of it starts to depreciate, and so you have this massive, outrageous inflation. So that's why you have people that are weighing cash And anyway, so the guy, getting back to the story about the guy with the wheelbarrow, on the way to the baker with his barrel full of cash, he would be robbed, right? Someone would knock him over and steal his wheelbarrow, but before he steals a wheelbarrow, he dumps out the cash and then runs off with a wheelbarrow. And the moral of the story is that in Germany during the 1930s, cash was pretty much useless. The wheelbarrow, which actually has a function, it has a purpose to it, actually means more than cash. And so the very difficult economic conditions, just the kind of the story, the narrative that I want to build for you as we think about the rise of the Nazis. And so this graph shows you the rise of unemployment in Germany. And we can see that their economy is kind of unstable during the 1920s, partly because they're rebuilding after the war and partly because of the war debt. But as you take a look at the unemployment, right, you can see the unemployment on the line here, right? And then in red is the Nazi vote. And so I know that correlation doesn't equal causation, but it seems to be that there's a pretty strong argument that can be made here that there is a strong correlation between the rise in unemployment and the rise of the Nazi vote, right? So the 1930s, early 1930s and mid-1930s is when the Nazis start to get more and more votes where they gain power, right? So one of the greatest ironies is that Hitler used a democracy to gain power, and then once he gained power, he never surrendered it. And so what happened is, as he gains power through, promising people things like jobs, I'm going to put you back to work, I'm going to reestablish national pride. We're going to forget about the Treaty of Versailles. We're going to forget about the war guilt that we've been, that everyone's kind of looked down on us for starting the war. We're going to forget about that. We're going to bring pride back to Germany. And so people kind of glommed onto that message. They wanted to work, they wanted to go back, and they wanted to have food and regular employment and housing, and they wanted to have a stable economy. And so he became very popular, was elected. It was by a narrow margin, but as soon as he gets elected, there was a fire at the Reichstag, and he immediately blames the communists for setting fire to the Reichstag when historians look back and said it was probably the Nazis that tried to burn the Reichstag. And then he immediately moved to have emergency powers given to him to take control in order to stop any type of spread of communism in Germany. They gave him the more and more power, and he never gave it back. And so one thing that he starts to do in order to build this national pride is he starts marching people through the streets. He starts marching these soldiers through the streets in order to convey strength and power and, the German grit again. And he starts promoting ideas about nationalism, about, unity, about pride, and about making people German again. I wanted to show you, just to kind of end this particular lecture on the rise of the Third Reich, just to show you the conditions of what led to the rise of the Nazis. In the next lecture, we're going to take a look at the rise of anti-Semitism in Germany and how that came to be. But I'm going to leave you with a youth rally that Hitler would go to and have these massive rallies. He had rallies all the time, constantly speaking in front of people, trying to promote his idea, promote his initiative, promote his message, and these large groups of people. And what's kind of interesting is that he was a great orator. You have to give him credit for where credit's due. He was a great monster, but he was able to rally people into this kind of frenzy and this unified vision. And I wanted to show you him in what he does, and so we can kind of take a look at his propagandistic methods. So think about the propagandistic methods as he's creating this idea of nationalism.
Adolf Hitler, der Führer der deutschen Jugend, hat das Wort.
Think about how he's creating a sense of unity, how he's creating a sense of superiority, and a sense of tradition.
Kann ich euch hier wieder begrüßen. Ihr seid heute hier in dieser Muschel nur ein Ausschnitt dessen, was außer ihr über ganz Deutschland steht. Und wir möchten nun, dass ihr, deutsche Jungens und deutsche Mädchen, in euch all das aufnehmt, was wir dereinst uns von Deutschland hoffen. Wir wollen ein Volk sein. Und ihr, meine Jugend, sollt dieses Volk nun werden. Wir wollen einst keine Klassen und Stände mehr sehen. Und ihr dürft sie in euch schon nicht mehr groß werden lassen. Wir wollen einst ein Reich sehen. Und ihr müsst euch schon dafür erziehen. Wir wollen, dass dieses Volk einst gehorsam ist. Und ihr müsst euch in dem Gehorsam üben. Wir wollen, dass dieses Volk einst friedliebend und aber auch tapfer ist. Und ihr müsst friedfertig sein.
Kind of interesting when he keeps talking about peace, when he brings so much destruction, right? So his mindset is peace through war.
Deshalb friedfertig sein und mutig zugleich.
The idea is we need to end the enemies for us to have peace.
Wir wollen, dass dieses Volk einst nicht verweichlicht wird, sondern dass es hart sein kann. Und ihr müsst euch in der Jugend dafür stehlen. Ihr müsst lernen, Entbehrungen auf euch zu nehmen, ohne jeweils zusammenzubrechen. Denn was wir auch heute schaffen und was wir tun, wir werden vergehen, aber in euch wird Deutschland weiterleben. Und wenn von uns nichts mehr übrig sein wird, dann werdet ihr die Fahne, die wir einst aus dem Nichts hochgezogen haben, in euren Fäusten halten müssen.
So we'll kind of leave off here. I mean, you can kind of watch more of these on YouTube if you're interested in taking a look at his propagandistic methods of creating this herd mindset. But he builds this sense of unity, this sense of that you need to devote yourself to a cause greater than you, and the sense of urgency, and the sense of we need to do this or we will be, destroyed, or we need to have this strength, and this idea of equality. And so it's kind of an interesting disconnect between what the message that he's promoting and promising here in actual reality, right? That we need to be strong in order to get these values that he's promoting, and creating this sense of superiority that only us can really capture this essence. Only us can be able to grasp this vision, right? And using the sense of tradition, of this is our heritage, this is who we are. You were born into this, and you need to live up to your forefathers, right? So the idea, just to give you a context of what the Third Reich means, and I use that term, I use Nazis and the Third Reich interchangeably. Third Reich is what Hitler called his government. Third Reich, Reich means empire, and so he saw the first empire as Rome, as a great empire within the Western world. The second empire would have been during the 19th century with Otto von Bismarck, and then he considers himself kind of part of that tradition, part of that legacy, the Third Reich. And so again, building on this tradition, this is our moment, this is our time. We are going to build a legacy just as great and just as equal to them, right? So we'll take a look at next time is the propaganda that he used to create this hatred and animosity towards the Jewish heritage.